Did you know that our planet is home to some of the most bizarre places? From a peculiar pink lake in Australia to a quaint, forgotten village in Italy, and even the most polluted location on Earth that can be deadly within hours, to a world that has been isolated for millions of years. Join us as we explore the weirdest and most unusual places on Earth. The Inception Island, Vulcan Point. Let's start with a place called Vulcan Point in the Philippines. It's like something out of a dream, kind of like the movie Inception. Here's the deal. It's an island, but it's on a lake, and that lake is on another island, which itself is on yet another lake, which is part of a big island. So Vulcan Point is an island and a crater lake, which is on Tall Volcano Island, which is on Tall Lake, which is part of Luzon Island. This whole setup is because of the frequent volcanic eruptions in this area. It's beautiful, but it's also dangerous. Tall Volcano has taken the lives of 6,000 people over the years. It had a big eruption in 1977 and another scare in 1991. There have been 33 eruptions recorded, and it's the second most active volcano in the Philippines. The most recent major eruption was in January 2020, and it nearly wiped out Vulcan Point. Believe it or not, Vulcan Point isn't the only place like this. In Canada, there's Victoria Island, which also has one of these Inception-style islands. But the catch is, it's super remote, with no easy way to get there. However, Victoria Island holds the Guinness World Record for being the biggest Inception island in the world. Richat structure, Mauritania. Next, we're heading down to the Sahara Desert, where there's something really amazing. For a long time, no one noticed it. People just walked past it for hundreds of years. It wasn't until the 1960s, when humans started going into space, that they saw how incredible it really was. In the heart of the desert, there's this special rock formation, and they call it the Eye of the Sahara. Gemini astronauts first saw it in the 1960s, and it became a famous spot for astronauts flying around the Earth. People have come up with lots of ideas about what it could be. One of the wildest theories is that it might be the lost city of Atlantis, like the one the ancient Greek philosopher Plato talked about. He said Atlantis had rings made of concrete, but most scientists don't take that theory too seriously. Another thought was that it might be from a meteorite. But the more accepted idea is that the rings are made of melted rock from the surface. According to NASA, it's probably an uplifted dome that got worn down to show the flat rock layers. The different layers make it look like a target or a bullseye. The melted rock theory is the most likely one, but geologists can't say for sure. So, for now, it's still a bit of a mystery. Mount Roraima. Let's journey across the Atlantic to Mount Roraima, a fascinating mountain that spreads across Venezuela, Brazil, and Guyana. Even though it's a mountain, it looks like an island floating among the clouds, like it's in a world all by itself. For a whopping 20 million years, it's been surrounded by super steep cliffs on all sides, which makes it completely separate from the surrounding areas. The top of this mountain is about 2.8 kilometers high, and it takes a 3-day hike to reach it. The local indigenous folks called it the House of the Gods, and believed that whoever made it to the top wouldn't come back. In the early 1900s, the famous British author Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the Sherlock Holmes stories, visited this mountain. He was so inspired by it that he wrote a novel called The Jurassic World about a place on Earth where dinosaurs still exist. Doyle's idea was that this mountain might be home to dinosaurs or other ancient creatures. But of course, that's never been proven. A lot of this area remains unexplored. And when National Geographic sent an explorer there in 1989, he said, "None of us have found ancient creatures or their fossils there." But the place is so tough to explore that only a small part of the 44 square miles has been checked. What they have found are black frogs, dragonflies, tarantulas, and plants that you can't find anywhere else. Mount Roraima is like a world of its own, full of unique discoveries. Socotra Island. Thousands of miles away, there's a place with a similar story. It's Socotra Island, which is technically part of Yemen, but it's all by itself in the Indian Ocean, closer to Africa than the Middle East. It's about 240 kilometers from Somalia, but 380 kilometers from the Arabian Peninsula. Socotra is like a world of its own. It's home to more than 300 plant species and 5 bird species that you can't find anywhere else on Earth. People call it the most alien place on Earth because of its unique environment, especially the dragon blood tree. This tree has a cool umbrella shape and doesn't look like any other tree in the world. But Socotra has had its share of problems. It has a history of pirates going back to Marco Polo's time. More recently, it's been a stopover for Somali pirates, and it's been affected by the ongoing war between Yemen and Saudi Arabia. Right now, the UAE military, a Saudi Arabia ally, is in charge of the island. So even though it's stunning, not many tourists visit because of all the issues. Dean's Blue Hole. Now let's head to the Bahamas, where we find one of the deepest known blue holes. While it's a popular spot for tourists, it's also quite helpful in our search for extraterrestrial life. Scientists who study caves are discovering tiny life forms in deep caves. These creatures can survive on sulfur compounds that are usually harmful to other life forms. Similar conditions might exist in very dark oceans far away, like under the icy shells of Jupiter's moon Europa and Saturn's moon Enceladus. Here's the thing about blue holes. They're breathtaking, but they're also very risky. Divers from around the world want to explore them, but even the most experienced divers can find them too dangerous. In April 2010, a professional diver named William Trubridge set a new record at this site by diving 92 meters deep without fins. Later that year, he reached 101 meters. However, in November 2013, another pro diver named Nicholas Mavoli tried to break this record and tragically died. He suffered from an upper respiratory squeeze because of the differences in pressure, which caused him to lose consciousness, and he couldn't recover. So these waters are still known to be very dangerous. El Ejido. Now, let's take a look at an area in Spain, which looks quite unusual when you view it from space. Southern Spain is famous for its really hot weather, but there's a lot of white in some parts of it. At first glance, it might seem like snow, but it's not snow at all. It's huge stretches of plastic covering one of the largest greenhouse setups in the world. If you live in Europe, there's a good chance you've eaten fruits and veggies grown in this very area. These plastic greenhouses cover nearly 100,000 acres along the coast. The region gets tons of sunlight all year, so they can grow vegetables throughout the seasons. But some environmental groups are concerned about the size of these operations. They worry that this intense farming could use up a lot of groundwater, which might take hundreds of years to recover. Lake Karachay. Over in Russia, there's a lake called Lake Karachay, and it's so polluted that just spending an hour in it can kill you. Shockingly, things used to be even worse. Back in 1990, if you just stood on the shore for an hour, that could have been deadly. This lake is close to the Mayak Production Association, one of the biggest power plants in Russia. The Soviet Union used to dump nuclear waste into this lake, and it had terrible consequences. According to GRIS.org, the lake caused a 21% increase in cancer cases, a 25% increase in birth defects, and a 41% increase in leukemia in the nearby Chelyabinsk region. Much like what happened with the Chernobyl disaster, the Soviet Union tried to hide and downplay how dangerous this was. Doctors weren't allowed to diagnose patients with radiation poisoning. Instead, they called it the special disease. In the 1990s, when Russia started to open up to the world, this lake was declared the most polluted place on Earth. They put concrete blocks over the lake, but it's nearly impossible to make the place completely safe again. Pink Lake, Australia. For our final destination, let's travel to a mysterious salt lake in Western Australia. Back in 1802, a British navigator named Matthew Flinders stumbled upon this lake while exploring the uninhabited islands of Western Australia. This lake turned out to be a really useful source of salt, and later it became a spot for tourists. It's safe to swim in because the water is super salty, which makes it easy to float. But don't even think about drinking the water because of its high salt content. In March 2022, Scott Tye at the University of Vermont found out why the water is pink. It's because of bacteria and algae in the water that have purple, red, and orange pigments to protect themselves from the extreme salt. When you mix all these colors together, you get that bubblegum pink color. That's it for our video. If you know of any other weird places on Earth we should talk about in the future, let us know in the comments below. And if you want to see more about similar places, check out our video on the most isolated places on Earth. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.